everyone who's coming in. So introduce yourselves in the chats. You could give your name if you'd like, company. If you want to kind of connect with each other on LinkedIn, add your LinkedIn profile. We were building a really big community here. So we really want you to be able to kind of connect with other folks. And also for the folks who are, one second. And also for the folks who are kind of watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, introduce yourself in the chat as well. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter now, we want you in the conversation as well. So we have a few, maybe 100 folks who are in the LinkedIn live room, or sorry, in the Zoom room. And we have a few hundred people watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter live stream. We want you in this conversation. So tell us where you're coming from, introduce yourselves, your name, etc. In the comments, wherever you're live streaming to. And also tell us what city you're coming from. We love kind of having this global presence at Community of 7. And we'll also, if you have any questions as well, make sure you put it in the comments as well, and we'll be reading that out as well. So hello, everyone. The focus on today's Let's Talk is on how to intervene when a manager is gaslighting their employees with the amazing Meeta Malik. For those new to Community of 7, there is one singular purpose of these Let's Talk calls, and it's about how do we create an environment where participants can help support each other wholeheartedly. And how do we create a community where you can come as your authentic self and talk with other souls trying to leave this world a better place. So if you can, turn, for the folks who are in the Zoom room, turn on your video because we want you in this conversation. This is not a passive webinar like other events you've probably been to. This is really about a conversation. And so seeing your beautiful faces really helps. So quick exercise for the next exercise. Top right hand side, I want you to put yourself on gallery mode. Let me unpin myself. Well, I don't need to unpin myself. Put yourself on gallery mode so you should kind of be able to see everyone. It's like a Brady Bunch grid. And for Let's Talk, we always start our calls with a series of questions, okay? And for this part, I'm not going to live stream it and you're just gonna see me, so don't worry about folks outside kind of seeing how you voted, okay? So if you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube on the live stream, you can answer yes or no for each question in the comments. So how many of you have been gaslighted at work? Raise both hands or write yes in the comments if you're live stream. How many of you realized you were being gaslighted in real time while it was happening to you? How many of you didn't realize till after the fact? There's been time. And if there's multiple times you've been gaslighted, you can answer accordingly. How many of you collected evidence of the gaslighting? How many of you went to HR or someone more senior to deal with the gaslighter? No, actually. How many of you felt shame around being gaslighted? How many of you felt like there was no one you could talk to? How many of you left jobs because you were gaslighted? Okay, so for the next activity, top right-hand side, put this on speaker mode so you should just see me. Today's Let's Talk is about how to intervene when a manager is gaslighting their employees, and it's with Meeta Malik. Gaslighting is one of those terms that seem to be thrown around a lot. Many mistake gaslighting for other forms of psychological aggression and abuse, such as bullying and exclusion, but it's a little bit different. So what is gaslighting? Gaslighting comes from a 1938 movie play called Gaslight, in which the protagonist's husband gradually convinces her that she's losing her sanity. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation. The gaslighter, or the person doing the gaslighting, manipulates the gaslightee, or the person being gaslighted, in a way that forces them to question their own version of events and even their own sanity. So gaslighting forces you to question the facts and ultimately yourself and your ability to do your job. I also want to read a passage from Meta's article on gaslighting in the Harvard Business Review. And I'm also going to add it to the comments so you can read it later. But I think it's one of the most powerful descriptions of gaslighting I've seen, pen to paper. So here it is. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where an individual tries to gain power and control over you. They will lie intentionally and they will set you up to fail. They will say and do things and later deny that it even happened. They will undermine you, manipulate you, and convince you that you are the problem. Too many people suffer in silence. We are gaslighted, told that it's our fault for the pain inflicted on us by these toxic managers. So what is a gaslighter personality? Gaslighting seems to come more naturally to some people rather than others. In fact, not all gaslighters are aware of what they're doing. And although the term is primarily used when someone is consciously manipulating a friend, family member, or coworker, for some, that bad behavior has developed over time and across various interpersonal relationships. And sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it. So psychological research has shown that gaslighters tend to share some common characteristics. So for those who are on this call, listen to it because it's going to sound familiar because it's probably the person who gaslighted you. They are A, highly manipulative. 2, they have a low sense of self-worth or self-esteem, which they bolster by bringing others down. Sound familiar? They are controlling to a point where they don't respond well when they don't have power. They have narcissistic tendencies, and they sometimes are seen at work as toxic leaders. So quick activity before we begin. So in the comments, you guys who've participated know what you need to do. Type this in, but don't press send until I tell you. You're going to answer this questions in the comments. For those who are watching on live stream, I want you to participate too. So whether you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or whatnot, in the comments, I want you to answer this question. But don't press send until I tell you. So in your opinion, why do gaslighters manipulate their victims? So answer it in the comments, don't press send. In your opinion, why do gaslighters manipulate their victims? Answer that. I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Enter. Low self-esteem, power, need to feel control, form of a power over another, being jerks, because they're afraid that they will lose their position, to protect their sense of worth, greed, fear, control, narcissism, scapegoating. Okay, so next question I'm going to ask, once again, you're going to put this in the comments, right? Don't press a send until I tell you. What course of action would you take, or do you think is the ideal step to take if you were being gaslighted, or even if you're being gaslighted now? What's the best course of action if you're being gaslighted? Put it in the comments, and I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press send. HR, go to HR, leave, document what happens, call them out, go to employee success group, HR, ask questions, record the facts, documentation. And I'm looking at LinkedIn and it's very similar answers as well. HR, document, only quitting helps, supervisor, HR has been useless in the past. I would say employee relations as well. Okay, so that's a lot. It's funny, before this call, Meta and I were talking and I was like, this is probably going to be the largest support group for people who've been gaslighted in the world. So welcome. We've just made a new world's record today. So today I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Mita Malik. Mita is a dear friend, but she's also a corporate change maker with a track record of transforming businesses from the inside out. She believes companies have a responsibility to make social impact. She gives innovative ideas a voice and serves customers and communities with purpose. She is currently the head of inclusion and equity and impact at Carta and is a top LinkedIn voice of 2020. If you have not subscribed to Mita or follow her on LinkedIn, you need to do that right now at this moment because she has some of the most interesting content on LinkedIn. As a former head of diversity, inclusion, and cross-cultural marketing at Unilever, Mita's efforts to build an inclusive culture has been celebrated. Under her leadership, Unilever was gender balanced at the manager level and above. Unilever was named the #1 company for working mothers by Working Mother Media in 2018, and #2 for best employers for women in 2020 by Forbes. Mita also co-created the first of its kind cultural immersion series to increase the cultural competencies of marketers, training over 5,000 marketers to date. So Mita, so excited to have you. If you want to kind of unmute, I'm also going to pin you right now. Hello, Mita. Hello, my friend. So hello. Mita, let's talk about your Harvard Business Review article. I'm going to give it a metaphorical mic drop. What spurred you to write the article on gaslighting?
Well, thank you for having me here today. You know, even as I came into this conversation, I have a lot of shame, embarrassment, anger, guilt, anxiety about this topic. And I probably had been working on that piece for over a year and journaling, but finally had the courage to publish it. And it's because I've been a victim of gaslighting. And that's why I wrote the piece. And I think it's something we don't talk often enough about. And so I wanted to share my experience, but I also wanted, as you know, Lan, I love writing and I try to teach from experience, but also like, so what do we do about it? Like what can we do to help each other? And you know, you just don't know what kind of pain people are going through, because I think during that time in my career, people would say that I was, you know, I was a thought leader. I had this amazing brand and presence, and yet I was in a lot of pain because not many people knew what was happening at work.
So, you know, you kind of mentioned shame, and it's funny because almost exactly a year ago, we had, I don't know if you remember, Nandini Jami, who's a co-founder of Sleeping Giant and Check My Ads. And she had actually talked about her former business partner gaslighting her and basically taking over the business, and how she just, you know, he would basically do things to kind of make her think that, you know, it was her, not him. You know, how do you kind of what exactly is gaslighting? Because it's really kind of hard to kind of pinpoint. Like, if you could kind of explain what gaslighting is in the workplace, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think my simple analogy, just in real life, if we were sitting next to each other and I slapped you across the face, which I would never do, but let's say I did.
Thank you.
And you said, why did you do that? You just slapped me across the face. And I said, no, I didn't. I didn't slap you across the face. And so that is what, like, repeatedly I would say would happen with me and this former manager. You know, I have many instances, and some of this will sound familiar to those listening, but you're incompetent and no one at this company would ever want you on their team. Like, I gave you a chance and I hired you. But then externally or in other meetings would be like, oh, Mita's just amazing. Isn't she incredible? All that she's done. It would be, you know, I would prepare decks and things that we all do. And this individual would say, yes, of course, you're going to come present at the meeting. And then I'd be waiting and I'd be like, where's the invite? Texting, like, am I presenting? Am I doing it? And then later on, colleagues being like, well, he said you weren't available to present. You know, telling me I was on track to be a VP while telling other people that I was a poor performer and seeding that. It was also things like, other people, like the standards were different, right? So like other people could travel, they could go to these leadership and development opportunities, but we don't have budget to send you. But yet all of my peers are going. And so that is how it consistently would show up. I remember I was being honored for something externally, which this individual had approved. And I was at the event and the person's blowing up my phone being like, where are you? You're supposed to be in this meeting. And I'm like, but I'm in New York City. Like the company's purchased a table for me. So it was that constant making you feel like you didn't understand what the reality was, or questioning the truth and rewriting the truth.
So there's some comments right now. What you just said really resonated with a lot of the folks who are here. Sounds very familiar. Sounds like my last job. These stories sound so familiar. I think what is so powerful and so brave of you to actually tell your story is that a lot of us, because I know I've been gaslighted in the past as well, there's almost a sense of shame to it, because the hard part is trying to explain what's happening. Like, you did such a powerful job at explaining the situation. But I know there's been circumstances where I've talked to people and they're like, there was no email trail. It was just basically these comments said in meetings, and it becomes a he said, she said. Absolutely. How do you articulate it, and how do you ask for help when this gaslighting is so, it's so hard to kind of touch and describe in a lot of ways?
I think it becomes really difficult. I will be honest and tell you, my circle of people who I trusted became smaller and smaller. I want to give a shout out to Monica, who's here, who was with me through that journey. But I also felt like, there were people who believed me and people who didn't. And that happens in many of these cases. You're imagining, you're making it up. You're stronger than this. Why would you put up with this? And so I'm embarrassed to tell anyone. Like, I don't want to be sharing anymore because I'm finding that people aren't supportive. And, at the sort of end of it, I had just lost a lot of weight. It was bad. I wasn't sleeping, and my mom and brother had to intervene. And it was like, for what? Which I think ironically now we're all sort of reevaluating. And the great pause that, like, enough is enough. I'm not going to be tolerating and staying in these types of cultures, but it's hard. And I think it was a trusted few that I would talk to who would, that is gaslighting. You're not losing your mind, even though the individual is trying to convince you are.
Did you go to HR, or is that something that you would recommend that the folks who are on this call do if they're being gaslighted?
I did, and it didn't work out for me. So I think that I ended up leaving.
Yeah.
I wanted the rights to my story, which I'm able to share now. So I think you have to do what makes sense for you. Anita Hill has a book called Believing that's out right now. And I don't have a very strong memory of her as a child, except I just remember this woman of color who's sitting with all these white men. Like, that's all I remember seeing on screen. And so now I'm like learning her story, but she actually says, like, one of the pieces of advice she gives people is that you need to know what process you're entering into, right? So, like, you have to understand, like, what the process will look like and how it will unfold, and the consequences, and how you would how you would manage and mitigate that. And I thought that was really powerful advice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we spoke about this before. I mean, like, it's very difficult to change a culture, and especially if this person is very senior to you, because if you go to HR, they're going to listen to you or the person who's more senior. And after you wrote the article, I had a quote in it because you had included a quote of mine. I got a lot of people reaching out, and one person mentioned that they were in a very similar toxic situation where their manager was gaslighting them, and they were about to leave, and that the toxic manager ended up being transferred to another part of the company, and now she loves her job. And it's one of those things where it seems like the only option might be either if you leave the company or B, you stay and then just hope, deal with the agony,
I mean,
and
yeah,
hope
I
for
think
that type of situation.
I think it depends, and I don't know whose quote this is. I won't take credit for it, but you can't heal in the place that hurt you.
Yeah.
And so for me, I wasn't going to heal there. And honestly, as I was leaving, I had a senior leader who knew what was going on. And she offered me a pretty great job. And I said, I can't stay here anymore, because it was in a different division, but I was like, I'm so like, I need to heal. And so I think that's something individuals have to assess for themselves, whether you can heal in that place or that you need to move on.
Yeah. So Jeff asked, so you're saying that if you've been gaslighted, move on. And I don't think that is the answer, Jeff. I think it's basically your circumstance, right?
I think it depends on your journey. It sounds like there's there's many different examples, right? I think for me, it had been going on long enough that I needed, for a lot of different reasons, to move on. I think there's opportunities to move internally. I think, as I talk about in the article, there are opportunities to intervene, especially other leaders, and the signs to watch out if an employee is gaslighting. So I think people have to do what makes sense for them. No one knows the journey except for you. You can't judge it. People might judge me for the amount of time I stayed in that situation.
Yeah. Why did you stay? Like, because I think you didn't leave right away, and this had been kind of taking place for a long period of time.
Yeah.
What was your impetus to kind of stay? Were you hoping for it to change, or?
Was hoping for it to change. I think your confidence gets shattered too. Like, it happens over time. So you just are sort of like existing, and it seemed like a lot of inertia to leave, but I couldn't stay. And also because you do think it'll change, and you do think you're making a bigger thing than it is. It's not a big deal, right? Like, buck up, be stronger. I think that's part of my cultural upbringing too. Being the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, it's like, just work hard, you work hard, and everything will sort itself out. So just work harder and just stop complaining. And who cares? You have this great job and you're doing well. So who cares? And so that was part of, you just kind of, you can overcome it.
And I also feel like with these manipulators, right? They're very good at knowing to not give a constant barrage of gaslighting or toxic behavior. They kind of will give it in waves, right? So that they can be really kind to you, and then really toxic, really kind, really toxic, because they know that if you keep on becoming toxic or gaslighting, you're going to leave. So they don't want you to leave. They just want you to endure the pain. Right?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I feel like there's kind of you kind of mentioned the cultural element too, of like kind of putting up things. Do you think there's a generational thing too? Because I think we're in the Gen X, right? I talk to a lot of folks who are kind of more millennials that are kind of like, oh, they would just leave in a heartbeat. Do you think there's kind of some element of generation too, in terms of like putting up with gaslighting?
I think it's I mean, I wouldn't say generational for me. I think there was a cultural piece for me. I think it could be both. But I think, it's just this toughen up mindset. I'll never forget when I told someone what was happening, and she was like, I wish you would call me earlier. I would just kick you in the butt and say, just show up differently. And I'm like, what? Like, right. And so there's a lot of shame in that, because I appear to be a strong individual, a strong leader, and yet this is happening. And someone asked, how long did I stay? And I stayed, it was a while. And I think, to your point, it got worse in the last like 18 months of that time. You know what I mean? Like, it was ups and downs. And I also, in the context of being a woman of color in this relationship, where I felt like I was just doing the work and trying to be good by the company. And it was also like, I would be punished for things that I thought, well, this is great for the company, but yet sort of the insecurity and the backlash that I would experience from the individual.
And so when you ended up leaving, how did you heal from that experience? Because I'm sure it was very traumatic, right? It's probably hard to get to trust someone again, or another company or whatnot. How did you heal during that process?
I think my writing heals me. Community heals me. Talking about this heals me. I was surprised by writing it, like how many people reached out to both Lan and I. And Dee, who was also in the piece. And I thought, wow, this is like a shared experience, unfortunately. a lot of
Yeah.
people go through it. I'm still healing. I think that these things take time, but I think the more you talk about them and you move forward over
What I
time.
love too is that you're so brave in sharing your stories that other people feel free to talk about it as well, right?
Yeah, and that was part of why I decided to write that, because it's like suffering in silence is really hard
Yeah.
to do that.
So I think we have a question, Monica. Let me see if I can find you. Fine, here we go. Oh, hey Monica, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Let me pin you.
Sure, I'd love to. So first of all, Lan, I mean, to thank you so much for having this. I can just see how much this is touching everyone, and so many people are nodding along. I'm sure you're busy presenting and tracking, but for those of us that can see each other, I just see a lot of recognition in the faces. So first of all, thank you for making space for this conversation. And I was just curious, I know that both Lan and Mita, you probably have ideas about this, but if we think about non-disclosure agreements, not in your case specifically, but more broadly. And if we think about everything from what we learned about Me Too, what we're learning about racial equity, in the era of our new diversity pivot point, if we think about just other injustices, inequities, and traumas, right, that people experience at work. I know, Mita, you have had a chance to think about and meet with some of the people that you admire that are kind of considering how, as a nation and world, we should reconsider the role that things like non-disclosure agreements or payouts play. And again, this is for everyone, this is not suggesting that you've been involved in one, but more in the broader context, you probably have opinions, having lived through what you lived through, if you had been put under one, right? So that's my question. What about NDAs? Because I know that I used to think, oh, they were only good. And now I've seen and I've read with Rowan Farrow and others about how much damage they can do to create cultures of complicity and, repeated trauma. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica.
I just want to thank Monica, because Monica, you've been such a great support to me in this journey and such an amazing friend. So thank you for being here. I had the opportunity to interview one of my heroes, Gretchen Carlson, as a part of the Troop HR community, and she's working on legislation to pass to get rid of NDAs. And I mean, NDAs, in my view, are a silencing mechanism. Because in many ways, as many people are asking, like, what's the route if you are being gaslighted? You can document, you can have witnesses, you could go to HR, and there's a possibility that you could get a settlement, right? And if there's that possibility, you likely have to sign an NDA, and you can't then share your story. Gretchen Carlson's story is really interesting because, there's been many movies made about her, and I've watched them all multiple times. She was never consulted on any of the movies. She's not allowed to be because of what she signed. And that to me was like, wow, other people are telling your story, but you're not allowed to.
And she can't profit from it either, right?
Yeah. And so that to me is like, wow.
And what's hard is that it becomes a vicious cycle because, if you look at her career now, she's basically blacklisted from any other type of media kind of newscasting. She hasn't had a typical broadcast career since she left Fox. And I feel like there seems to be that once you become a whistleblower or whatnot, that you get that same fate. It's a tough decision to make because you want change, but then you're punished when you make those tough decisions. Right. So one of the things you mentioned in the article is that, the training development in the corporate world is about $370 billion a year. Yet research shows that 30% of bosses are toxic. I would think that's probably even higher. What can we as people leaders do to hold these toxic managers accountable?
I think part of it starts with, I was just talking to a colleague about this. So many people are getting promoted. We're promoting a lot of people. And I think it's really important to set those behaviors and norms when you're a new manager.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm a new manager working for somebody who is a toxic boss, I'm learning those behaviors, and I think it's okay. And
Mm-hmm.
10 years later, if I am the gaslighter, it's like, wow, if someone had just intervened and helped me to 10 years ago, she wouldn't end up being the leader that she is today. So I think there's a lot around how you help new managers and new leaders, and also to acknowledge some people maybe I'm not meant to lead a team. Maybe I'm meant to be an individual contributor because I'm really good at that and I have some really great expertise, and that's my path. Like maybe I'm not somebody who actually enjoys managing people, yet I'm sort of being forced on a company track to do that. I also think one of the things I talk about in the piece is that watch out for signs of gaslighting. So we should be.
What are some of those signs?
We should be protecting our culture. Some of those signs will be if you're leading a meeting and I was supposed to present and my boss says, oh, well, Mita wasn't available to present. Ping me, ask me, make sure I'm on invites. I think when the narratives, when a manager starts making jokes about somebody, starts seeding a negative narrative about their performance, when you see people being repeatedly excluded and subtle things, oh, Mita wasn't invited to this event. Oh, she had to watch her kids. Did she? Right. Or travel to a conference or an event. Everyone's there, but a certain person. Like start to watch for the signs of that. And I think, Lan, what you said in the piece was so important about when your most passionate people go quiet, ask yourselves why. Like, why is Mita, who is a high performer, now being labeled a low performer? Like, what is going on there? And I think too often we're scared to ask the question, right? Like it's easier just to label me a low performer rather than to say, let's really interrogate what's happening here. And so I think that's really key.
I'm going to highlight some of the comments that are on LinkedIn, but also in the Zoom room. Bad bosses teach us that we will never do what we should never do. Jesse says, yes, it feels like silent suffering. Mita, thank you for sharing. I think it's hard to navigate how to move forward. I found it challenging during my path to move on because a part of me feels like I am withholding the truth when asked why I'm looking for new opportunities with prospective leads. I feel proud for using my voice in my current situation. I am looking to move into consulting and culture change because of the experience I had. I want to help. Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. So, Jesse makes a great point, which is if you quit a job because you've had a toxic manager or someone who's gaslighting, do you bring it up in interviews in terms of the reason why you left?
I mean, I think for me, it's like I have a pretty clear filter now, and I really interrogate. I think when I'm looking for opportunities, I think too often I've been trained, like many of us have been trained, I really want this job. I'm going to do my best to impress them. And it's like, well, no, you're actually interviewing them as well. Mm-hmm. And so looking for those signs, trusting your instincts if you're talking to someone and you're like, maybe I need to have another conversation with this person. And I think also rather than, I think like if you're healing from the gaslighting experience, it's hard to talk about it. I'm still having trouble talking about it now, and it's been a while. So I think that for you to just in a more positive place, just say like, here are the things I'm looking for. Yeah. Like, and to very clearly outline that for yourself, also to verbalize it when you're in the interview process, and also to ask meetings and take meetings. Like I've been in situations where I've gotten an offer and I've asked to meet with more people, just because I want to get more of a sense of the culture and the company and the individuals. What are some of the questions that you think we should be asking to kind of weed out to see if a potential, employer might have a toxic culture? You could ask, so many questions, like if you're meeting with your future boss, like how would your team describe you? Mm-hmm. What do you think your strengths and areas of opportunity are? What did your boss say in your last performance review? I think there's so many different ways. And I think I've been in situations where I've asked to meet with the boss's boss, mm-hmm. and ask that person, like, tell me more about Lan. Like, she's amazing. Yes. It's interesting. And also the peers. And it's interesting when you ask a lot of questions, the things that people don't say are the things that you should watch for. It's really interesting. The things that people don't say when you're asking questions. I'll give you an example, very different example, but let's say you're looking for a nanny and you call and you ask about Mita, and Lan says, well, Mita was so engaged with my children, always kept them safe, loved them to pieces, and was a great cook. Okay. The things that I miss out of that reference is reliability and flexibility, and if she showed up on time, or he or they, and did the job.
Mhm.
Right. So it's really interesting. Some of the key things that you might have left out in that reference, like one of the first things you might say is like, we're absolutely reliable, dependable, and flexible. And you said everything else but that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's funny because once I became a hiring manager, because I've encountered many assholes in my corporate days, I would start every interview with this: I don't hire assholes. And I would literally every interview, and anyone who's interviewed with me will, will contest to this. I would just literally say, I don't hire assholes. I don't care, what school you graduate. That's Claudine, right? That's the first thing I ask, or state. I don't hire assholes. I don't care how accomplished you are. And this is the culture I'm trying to create. And when you create that, say that up front, it kind of automatically weeds out some people, because they will you can kind of see the fear in their faces if they are an asshole.
Like, the other thing you just reminded me of is like, do the reverse reference check. If I'm going to join Lan's team, go on LinkedIn and find some people who worked for her. It's a small world. It's not that hard. We're connected. And like, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but my brand is out there. And I've had a lot of people that have worked on my team over the years, and they'll tell you the truth of what it's been like to work for me. And so I think yes, I want Lan as well, no matter I'll work for you. But I think that's a way too, like, don't be afraid. I always say, do this once you get the offer. Get the offer, and then you can do all of that. But you can certainly do your own investigation and research to make sure if it's going to be the place that you're going to thrive.
So we have another powerful question for Monica. You're like one of our favorite. I think we should just leave you on and just kind of have you co-host. So Monica, what's your question for Mita?
Sure. Well, I'm struck by all these great questions about how we can tune into, right, what being gaslit looks like. And I'm very taken by all the experiences people are sharing about how awful it feels. And I'm wondering, Mita, looking back, let's say someone's lucky enough to have a trusted relationship with someone and they are able to share some of what they're going through. What would allyship look like in those moments for us, Mita, when you think back on it? What do you wish people had done that maybe they didn't do at the time? And what advice would you have for those confidants of people that are being gaslit? Like, how would you, I say that in part because sometimes when we think about things like microaggressions, we know that some people don't want you to say anything in the moment because they would prefer to deal with it on their own and they don't want to make it worse. And so you're making me think about that. Like, what's the right way to show up? Any tips in that area?
Great question. I wish people had believed me. I wish people had believed me when I went to colleagues and told them what was happening. I think it was happening to others. They didn't want to talk about it. And so I wish, because there was a clear divide in the people that were like supportive, and then the people who were like, you're making this up. Like, this is not, or this person has done this for so long. Why are you making a big deal of it? Just like work through it. I also think, to the point about HR, I think it does make a difference when you have witnesses, when you have support. If Monica, as another senior leader, would go on my behalf with me to HR, right? And that takes courage, but that's what allyship is. It's not for the faint-hearted, right? And so for Monica to come and say, hey, I'm coming with you to HR, like, here are the things I've observed. So for Monica to also be helping watch out for some of these things that are happening that we just talked about. So it's not just me as the target who's been documenting, but I have others around me documenting. And I also think one of the things that I thought about when I was writing the piece is exactly to your question, like, what could people have done? And I think, like, trying to destabilize the power of the gaslighter. So if the gaslighter's peers were making sure I was invited to these meetings or to these events, or when the narrative about me was getting negative, for Monica to be like, that's actually not been my experience with Mita. And here are all the things I've seen her done and bring. And then I think in organizations, especially when it's possible to isolate the gaslighter. I mean, ultimately, the conversation has to be back to what Lan would say, like, assholes aren't allowed to work here. So it's really not. It's unfortunate that so many times the target has to leave, but it's really that these individuals should be either coached and given a chance to be better, redeem themselves, or they need to leave. But in some situations, you could isolate the gaslighter, make them an individual contributor, right?
Yeah, that's really a great point. There's power in numbers in a lot of ways. And a lot of times what I've noticed with bullies, they you know, they want to isolate, you know, the victim, and they don't want people to come together and talk. And so the more you talk, the less power they have. And it was funny because last night I was telling these two young girls who were kind of like on the agency side about this event. I was like, please come. And I was just telling how great you were in the article. And they were like, this recently happened to them. And they actually ended up leaving the company. But what they did was both of them came together and they realized that that culture, like they were being gaslighted, and they both didn't realize that the other had experienced the same thing. So when they came together, it was almost like, it's not just me, right? So there's a question by Holly Brown. I would pin you, but I can't find you on the screen. Her question, Holly, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Or do you want me to ask it? Okay, I'll just ask, yeah.
Hey, it's Holly. Sorry. Yeah, I was just curious, like, we talked a little bit about performance reviews. What if a company doesn't have a performance review or conversations that sort of talk through that performance?
I would ask you to work with others to advocate to make that happen. I mean,
Okay.
performance reviews or coaching conversations, I think if you don't have those, that's where the behavior goes unchecked. And so having a touch point once a year, it should be at minimum twice a year,
Okay.
where Lan, as my boss, could sit down with me with, if there's 360 feedback, like, here's what I'm hearing and seeing, here's what's concerning to me, here's how you're not living up to our values. Like, there has to be that conversation. So I think more and more, like, not having performance reviews are really difficult, because then how do you, where are those natural checkpoints to have those conversations? And not that people shouldn't be doing that anyways, but I think sometimes you need that structure in a company to allow for that conversation.
And you've mentioned that before, Mita, about the power of 360 reviews. And a lot of organizations don't do that, you know, specifically because upper management don't want to be reviewed. How do you advocate for it? Because I think it is really important that you get both feedback, because how do you, you know, uncover whether, you know, how direct reports are feeling?
I think we're just in a different time right now. I feel like with the Great Resignation, or as I say, the Great Awakening, as we were talking about, Lan, is that people are like, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm not going to work in places where I am celebrated, that where I'm not celebrated, and I'm not, you know, I'm not going to tolerate any of this behavior anymore. And so I think you're seeing, as people are leaving, there's more of an interest in exit interview data. Why is it you're leaving? Why aren't you staying? And I think people being more and more honest about that. And I'm hoping that people, and it does seem like more companies I'm talking to are looking at 360. They have no choice. The marketplace is shifting. I mean, there's so many people looking and leaving right now that I think the pressure is on in a different way.
Sorry,
Absolutely.
my daughter is
Thank
just
you.
yelling.
I appreciate that.
No, thank you, Holly.
So Viplav, do you want to unmute? I think your question is generally to the group, right? Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to ask it?
And I can ask it. Thanks everyone for sharing. I think it's comforting to know that a lot of us have had so much common elements that we've experienced and even tried as well. But has anyone actually been successful in stopping a gaslighter in their works before it gets worse? And because what I've found myself, and also hearing or listening to some of the others, is it's resulted in us leaving, and in some cases jobs that we absolutely loved as well. So has anyone actually stopped a gaslighter in their tracks?
Anyone wants to share? If not, I can kind of give you an example. Tell me in the comments if you have something to share, or just actually unmute and you can make your comment. So I'll give you my example. And so I had someone that was actually kind of on my same level, but they were basically saying to gossiping to different people that I was, not to be trusted, not this. And if any of you work with me, you'll know that I record everything. And so what I did was I requested a call with our COO and the person. And then he had a meeting with 2 of his direct reports, and I also it was just me. And I literally had a paper trail of everything. And basically when we had this call, he was like basically throwing all of these, threats at me. And I basically line item dates. On October 1st, you did this. On this date, you did this. This, your direct report said this. And I literally outlined everything. So if you document everything and you have backups, when you're in these meetings, a lot of times they're not prepared. The hard part is a lot of folks who gaslight won't necessarily leave a paper trail. And that becomes a little bit more difficult. Anyone else have something they want to kind of share in terms of where they've kind of dealt with a gaslighter?
I would just add, I have seen gaslighters be dealt with and exit the company, like to your point, when there's enough evidence and enough people are coming forward saying the same thing. I think that's when you'll see a shift. I think unfortunately, what's really exhausting is that you're going through this and it's like, you don't want to have to document everything because it's exhausting. So that's the push pull. But to Lan's point, the more data points you have and you come and you're like, I have 25 examples, date, time, meeting, then it's like the evidence is there. And if multiple people are coming with similar examples, then I think you'll see more movement. But I think what's so painful is you're going through this and the last thing you're thinking about is now I have to write the date he told me I was incompetent. Right. And so that's the real struggle, I think.
Yeah. Amar kind of messaged me and he gave some really good tips. There are 2 ways to kind of appease a gaslighter. 1, enable them, or I guess play into their ego. 2, stay silent. Since they are insecure, appeasing to their ego by flattering them. As icky as it was, it's the only way to deal with them. Which seems like such a painful way to live your life. But I totally agree, Amar. So let me see. And
I wanted to add, Lan, I think that's I think those tips are really valid, especially when you know this goes up and up and down situation, relationship, and you might be in a moment of survival mode, right? And so I think it's you can't judge anyone's journey. And so I think those are tips that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, giving that example of someone who reached out to me and they were like, they waited long enough where that person, I think they either quit their job or they were transferred to another place. And now she loves her job and she's glad she didn't leave. Right. So she could have been bullied out of that job and quit, but then that wouldn't have benefited her, Awesome. We have so many comments. I'm trying to find. Anyone else have a question they want to kind of unmute and ask? Because we have a lot of great comments right here. Let me see. There's folks who kind of mentioned that, it's painful because, so the documentary, one of it's painful because your job shifts to documenting everything and it's mentally exhausting. So exactly what you just said. Monica says, listening to this and reflecting, it seems like an important reflection point before we accept roles to ask these questions. And this doesn't work out if we can't choose our managers, but when we can, vet. So true. And it's so funny because I have said to so many, folks kind of ask me like for job tips. And I'm like, really a job can be heaven or hell depending on who you report into. So if that's even you could be a C-suite executive and you're reporting into the CEO, but if the CEO is an a-hole, you can have a miserable time, right? There's no easy answer.
I would add to something that Monica said, which is trust your instincts and listen to, I would say sometimes the whispers, they're the loudest. before I ended up working for that individual, there was one person who warned me when I look back on it. And I didn't, you hear what you want to hear.
Mhm.
Right. And so I would just say, like, if people are saying something or not saying something, read between the lines and interrogate and make the best choice for you.
Yeah, I love that.
Lan and Mita, I was just wondering, this is Christy. I don't know where the question is there in the chat, but I was just wondering if either of you could speak a little bit to the fact that there seems to be a disproportionality between men versus women. This appears to be a situation where women are oftentimes targets from men with being gaslit in various organizations and businesses.
Thank you for that question. I'll jump in and then ask Lan. I'm sure she has a point of view here. And Lan, actually, you brought this up about the profile of a gaslighter being very insecure. And I, as a woman of color, and this was a white, someone identified as a white man, I felt like as the time went by and I was doing well, it got worse. The gaslighting got worse. And I was like, but I'm just trying to do my job. Do I stop doing my job? Like, the more accolades I got from other individuals or the more projects I was put on, it actually escalated. So it is sort of interesting, the notion and the phrase that I did not coin, called going from the office pet to the office threat, which really talks about the experience typically of Black women. I will find the article and put it in the chat, but I think it broadly applies to also women of color. And so I noticed that in my journey.
I mean, personally for me, I don't feel like it was a gender issue, because I've had women that were gaslighting me left and right, right? And I think it had more to do with people's tendencies to be insecure, because usually the more insecure a person is, the more they're, they try to act a certain way or make other people feel less than, right? And for folks who have followed my post, you all know I hate bullies. I literally hate bullies since I was a young kid, and I used to get into a lot of fights in grade school because I hated bullies. And there's a bully tendency to kind of like feed off people who you feel aren't as strong, right? And that could be male or female. I mean, I haven't really seen a gender difference where most men, I've had great bosses that are men, not great bosses that are women. I think it kind of depends. And I've talked to other folks too who've said, some of my main tormentors are women, right? Let me see. Anyone else have a comment to ask? Some comments. Oh, I think someone just wants.
Lan,
yes. Keep on talking.
Lan, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't think. Yes. Hey, Lan and Mita. I guess my question really is, or I'd love to know your thoughts on. Traditionally, we were trained. All of us were trained. You go to HR because they're looking out for you, right? And looking through the chat, you're just seeing that so many people just have tried that and it's failed. Curious, what do you think the future of reporting these things and holding people accountable for them looks like? Because the old HR model, I just don't think works. Curious what your thoughts are.
I would say that in my career, I've met a lot of not so great HR career professionals and a lot of great HR professionals, right? So, and I think the function does get a bad rap for a lot of reasons, but I think there's also some really great HR people doing really good work. I think, we relegate this to the HR function, the people function. It's not their job to protect the company. It's all of our jobs, and the company is the people. And so particularly what I'm talking about in this case is like, where were all the leaders who saw what was happening to me? Where was the boss's boss, right? And so I think often too, it's a cop-out if we think we're going to go to HR and HR is going to fix it. Yes, they have a role in it, but I would say leaders have a role in who you decide to put on your team and lead. And it's a responsibility and an honor to lead teams. And so we all have to step up. And I think also stop saying it's like HR's responsibility. I mean, I think there's equal blame, but I think that's where I'd like to reframe it.
Love that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Jetha or Jitha, do you want to unmute and ask your question? I think you have a really good one. Jitha, if not, I'll ask it. Okay.
Hey, how you going?
Hello. Do you want to ask your
Here
question?
from Melbourne. Being vulnerable.
Australia. Hello.
Right. I just went for a walk, so hence just come back. Being vulnerable. Mita, how did vulnerability play while you were gaslighted, so to speak? Does that really come into play? And what's your advice to people for being themselves and being vulnerable?
I try to lead with vulnerability. I think that's important, but I think the times where I was vulnerable, people didn't believe me. And so that's difficult, right? Especially, I think someone had put in the chat, like, to confront the gaslighter, right? It goes back to my very first example. I slapped Lan across the face and she asked, why did you do that? And I say, no, I didn't do that. And then you're like, this is a non-starter. I'm being vulnerable, or what, it's like, how? So I think that's, I think that also, I would say in my case, shut me down, because the more people I was trying to find to get help and people didn't believe me. And I would say not just inside my company, I would say externally too, like, buck up, like, what, this doesn't sound that, are you sure that's what's happening? I don't know. Right. And so then you actually, like I said, my circle got really closed off. And I think now people realize during that period of my time why I had become so isolated from a lot of connections and people who I had formerly been in touch with.
Yeah. So you kind of answered this question earlier, and you said you did a lot of writing to kind of heal. But let's just kind of go broadly with the folks who are kind of on this call. Like, what are ways where people can really kind of heal and move on and completely disconnect from this experience? I know your therapy was writing. Any other kind of suggestions for the folks who are on this call?
Find your next chapter and places that will celebrate you and not tolerate you, or worse, gaslight you. And that doesn't, to the point earlier, it's your journey. You can very well stay in that organization and move somewhere else. It's not always that I think you have to exit. And I think finding, community and conversation, and that's what I've actually really, the silver lining of the pandemic is I've met so many people from around the world that I normally wouldn't have. Whether it's through Community of Seven or other organizations. And so find your community and remind yourself of all the things you're great at. I think that sometimes we are so mean to ourselves, like the things that we would never say to someone else, runs through our heads about ourselves, right? Like, you would never say that out loud to a friend, through the inner voice, right? And so the kindness and the grace that you should show yourself, I think, is super important.
Love that.
Thank you.
Does someone have a quick question? Mita has to go right at 6. Does someone have a
Yeah,
question?
this is Holly. I just wanted to thank you both from the bottom of my heart. I think that these sessions that you're putting on, Lan, are amazing. They really connect to the heart. I went through a similar experience in April where I was with a company for a long time, same leadership, and I started feeling like the gaslighting, and I just wanted to escape. And so I took on a new role. So I'm now recreating myself. I hired an internal coach to help guide me through that. But it is very important to talk about it with leaders, executives, to understand, because you have this track record that you're a high performer, and your confidence gets shaken just by being talked down to. And it's very sad, because I didn't feel like I had an outlet to go.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pause you for a second, only because Mita has to has another call right at 6.
Yes. Okay.
Can you guys all turn on your videos, put this in gallery mode, because she deserves a big round of applause. Turn on your videos, turn on your volume. Mita deserves a big round of applause.
Yes,
turn on your videos, guys. Woo, thank you.
Mita!
Thank you. Great.
Thank you so
These are
much.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Exactly. But guys, this has literally been the world's biggest therapy session for gaslighting ever. So the one key takeaway, you are not alone. And it's not you, it's them, it's the assholes.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank
Thank you, Mia.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Woohoo, bye.